Great, thanks, Glenn. Thanks for asking. My name's Steve, and I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is April 18th, 2014. My home group is the Common Solution Group. We meet Monday nights in Princeton, New Jersey. We are a hybrid format that runs two different formats. One is a big book study, and the other is a winter speaker series, which we're almost through and switching back at the beginning of March. I sponsor men. I have a sponsor who knows he's my sponsor, and boy, I wish I could tell you I got AA right away. My story started out back in 1996. I'm on academic probation. I'm 23 years old at Penn State University, and I am failing out because I can't stop drinking. I grew up under the burden of potential. If I always just remember saying, man, if I could just stop partying, then I'd, fill in the blank. And I'd watched all my friends kind of check the life boxes. They could just like go to school, stay in school, graduate from school, get a job, keep a job, get in relationships, keep in relationships, and get the stuff that they said if you just got these things, then you'd be happy. And I couldn't do that. I was an athlete growing up. I played hockey for over 20 years and played professional golf briefly, which I'll get into a little bit later. But I just couldn't handle this whole school and life and all that stuff. And I remember going down to this CAP center, this counseling center, trying to figure out what was wrong with me. I was horribly depressed all the time. Couldn't wake up before noon. I was doing what kids did back then. I didn't grow up in an alcoholic home, although my family tree has a bunch of bottles in it if you rattle it. And I didn't understand what was wrong with me. And I remember going to see this guy, and I remember talking about my drinking a lot, and everything kind of shifted back to the focus of my drinking. And the guy just looked at me one day and he said, Steve, we're going to meet here again next week. Why don't you tell me how many times you think you're going to be able to drink and do what you do until now and the next time I see you? And I had to stop for a second because I knew we had a big weekend coming up. We were playing Michigan that weekend. So I was like, it's probably going to be a pretty big weekend. I'm going to go with 4. And I went home with the sincere desire that not a big deal. I'm just going to do what I do 4 days and boom. And the next thing I know, I come to on Friday. It was Monday when I went to this meeting, and I didn't know anything about blackouts or brownouts or anything like that, but I was losing time. I knew Tuesday through Thursday happened, but I couldn't tell you what happened in those days. And I remember going there the next day, just sitting there going, man, something seemed to happen where I would just change my mind, right? Yeah, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow, right? And of course, he started describing something to me about abuse and dependency and blah blah blah. Next thing I know, I got myself a medical withdrawal to get out of college, and I'm thinking I dodged a bullet because if not a lot of my parents did not graduate from college. They have 4 kids who did. 3 of them got advanced degrees, and then there's me. And I just remember thinking, whew, thank God I dodged that bullet, thinking that I kind of somehow manufactured this. And this, kind of comes back to me later. But, so I go home and I decided I get 28 days in this rehab. And they gave me this thing called a big book, a 3rd edition big book back in 1996. And they told me to read some of the stories in the back to see if I could relate. And I was like, all right, it's all long enough. And I'm in detox and I'm reading this book and I flip it over to the front part of the book and I start reading this language in this book. And I'm like, who the hell talks like this? This is the worst book I've ever read. There's no character development, no, building of anything. I'm like, I didn't realize the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous was an old school textbook. It's going to tell you what it's going to tell you. Then it tells you what it told you. And there's kind of summaries and things like that and different ways to qualify yourself. Well, I had no concept of this coming in here. And when I got out, I was 23 years old, and some guy my age now picks me up and starts taking me to meetings. And I'm going to tell you what, guys, back in 1996 in the Allentown, Pennsylvania area where I got sober, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous was not very popular in the rooms of AA. right? And I'm happy to realize that it saved my life. That the Alcoholics Anonymous is making a big comeback in the rooms of AA. Saved my life. And I remember going back home to start where all great success stories start. To regroup is on mom and dad's couch. And I was trying to just not drink and go to meetings, right? And I lucked out. I fell in love with the fellowship, and I did the sober softball. And what that did, because that's not been everybody's experience, to kind of just come in here and all of a sudden fall in love with the fellowship and be like, wow, I actually felt like I belonged here. I was the youngest person in the room, but people were asking me to go to the diner afterwards, and they were actually inviting me to come back. And that didn't happen a whole lot back then. And little by slowly, we'd got to go to these meetings, and I'd hear, talk about my day and share, and all of a sudden things started getting repetitive, and I keep hearing about people's divorces and their personal problems and their broken lawnmower and cats and things like that. And then something starts to happen at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. I start becoming unglued in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I can't blame it on booze or drugs. I'm sitting there going, my God, I haven't had a drink or any other mind altering substance in about 3 months. And I am like suffering from a part of this disease that I had no idea was a part of the disease, this spiritual malady, this restless, irritable, and discontented. I had no idea my soul sickness, my spiritual malady is what got my mind so uncomfortable that it actually started getting me to move out into reality and build my own experience, right? I had no idea I just thought, hey guys, thanks for getting the booze and drugs off me. I'll take it from here. I'm going to go off and check those life boxes, right? Thinking that that's what was going to make me happy, because I believed, and I've been taught since I was very young, if I get the house, the job, the car, the family, then I'll be happy. And I end up getting back to school and graduating and kind of not really having a big step experience. I mean, they told me I worked the first few steps getting here, and to kind of go to page 64 and write out my life story and share it with somebody, because I was pretty uncomfortable. And as you can imagine, there was no real depth and weight to that work. I would just kind of write out in shorthand in summaries, because I was just like, man, this is a lot to write. And I don't want to sit across somebody and have it feel like we're going to take 6-8 hours. So I did a lot of stuff in shorthand. I didn't do a fourth column. I had a small experience with a fifth step where it was basically like a congressional thing. And I got some relief out of it. I made some tornado amends to my family. They just kind of pat me on the head and say, oh, just keep doing what you're doing. And off I went in search of door number 3. Just don't drink, go to meetings, get the right kind of car, the right kind of self-centered sexual misconduct, the right kind of this, that. And I had no idea I was out after door number 3. I thought the problem had been removed. And what I didn't realize is you can't treat alcoholism with sobriety. Alcoholism, the I, self, me. I was going off into levels of self-reliance that I now look back on, it was absolutely astonishing. And I get some of those things. And I went down, I had some guys put some money together for me, and I moved down to South Florida in the late 90s to pursue a career in professional golf. And a couple of years into this process, I'm kind of going to meetings here and there, and I'm starting to have the same experience that I did up north. And I'm kind of going, all right, guys, I've been there, done that. Thanks, AA, appreciate it. I tried everything you guys had to offer, except maybe the 12 steps and maybe trying to live this way on the daily. And 2 years into this process, I injure my back, ends my playing career, and I ended up walking into a doctor's office in the late 90s in South Florida complaining of back pain. And as you can imagine, I got the golden prescription and this, that, the other thing. And I only mention this. I'm a big believer of singleness of purpose, but I'll tell you what, I share this in an AA meeting because the pain of this is what the baseball bat that God used to get my attention later on. And I was never a pill guy until I became a pill guy. And I'm moving further away from AA. I'm all of a sudden I meet this teacher who takes me under my wing, and I came up with a bunch of mini tour players that you now see on TV that are playing for millions of dollars, and they were part of our crew of where I learned from. And I had come to my mentor as a player, so when the players got messed up, they sent me out on tour with these guys. because they knew I wouldn't screw it up, or at least I knew what it was like to kind of get back on track. And all was right for a time, right? Things were going great. I had arrived. I'm traveling on tour with players. I'm starting to make some money. I'm starting to check those life boxes, guys, right? And and the back got a little better. Did the physical therapy. I got a job in the Hamptons in the summertime. I'd winter in Palm Beach, and I travel around the world on jets with these tour players. And I mean, it was like Bill and Bill's story where I had arrived, right? And little by slowly, as things got better externally, when things were at their absolute best on the outside materially, I was bankrupt spiritually, emotionally, right? I'm smoking two packs of cigarettes a day. I'm walking all the time. So my back is constantly injured, and I'm constantly having to go back to these pain pills. And I took them as prescribed, right? And I had no idea what this stuff was starting to awaken in me until 12 years into my period of what I call sobriety, when things were at their absolute best. I had the most amount of money in the bank. I had a nice car, this, that, the other thing. Things looked good. That suddenly the thought crossed my mind. And what's weird about this is I didn't think the drink through. I didn't call anybody. The same voice that told me to pick the drink back up was the same voice that told me to put the drink down many moons ago. And that time when that voice revisited me, it didn't sound like a problem. It sounded like the solution again. And I was not involved in that decision. So stood, I'm down in South Florida. This guy had a big bar behind me at his house. And I just stood up, walked behind me, made myself a drink and drank it. And the craziest thing happened, you guys. Nothing. I was expecting me to start guzzling vodka, or my head to spin around, and I remember thinking this, man, well, I think I was just going through a rough patch back in the 90s, that maybe I'll ride this pony for a little bit, and besides, if things get bad, I'll just go back to AA and report what I learned, thinking that I could. And I started drinking on the weekends and started drinking Thursday to Sunday. I'm smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. Now I'm hanging out in this atmosphere of golf where drinking and or drug use is encouraged, and it's readily there because everybody's got bad backs and elbows and all this other stuff. So I don't have to pay for any of this stuff. I'm getting everything mostly for free. And it just got to the point where I couldn't stand doing it anymore. Even though it was free, the price was too high. Right. And so I decided to start trying to go back to AA. Now I'm a drinking member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm trying to go to meetings and hear something that's going to try to keep me out of the liquor store that night. And most times I would lose that bet. And little by slowly, the phone stops ringing for this great job that I had, kind of traveling around the world and making my own schedule. And when you show up late smelling like booze, these $1 million athletes start to get a little cranky, right? And then the phone stops ringing. And then I have to get a job at a club, folding sweaters and running tournaments and things that I absolutely hate. And I have to move back up north, right? And little did I know that one drink where suddenly the thought crossed my mind in my 12th year of sobriety lasted 6 years. I couldn't put the drink down. I was drinking so much worse than I had when I stopped, and I couldn't stop. And I'm sitting there going, oh my God, I'm one of these constitutionally incapable people. I'm going to drink myself to death or blow my brains out. And I remember leaving work to go get what I need to get. Because at the time now I was married, I had a house, I had a kid, and I got this job I hate that I got to leave early to go get what I need to get for my friends that have all the free stuff that I had to drive and go get. And I had to stop by a daycare and pick up my, infant son in his car seat. And I'm dragging this kid down to get my booze and my drugs. And I remember my wife was working late on the weekends, and I remember going, okay, I got a window. You ever remember when you have a window and you can drink what you get to do what you need to do to get there. And I remember basically taking my son in his car seat, and I'm going into this liquor store, and I got a carton of cigarettes, a bottle of booze, and a baby. And it's like a real Norman Rockwell painting. It was really like Father of the Year kind of stuff. And I remember, going home, and I had to feed my son, and I get him fed. I put him down, and I remember sitting there going, "Oh no, I ran out of booze, and I still have more time, and I hadn't got where I needed to get to. Right, I hadn't hit the mark." So I take and I leave my sleeping infant in the house by himself, and I leave him to go down this windy road to back to this liquor store. And I could have crashed my car. And, I'm a kind of guy, when I'm drinking, I black out. I forget I leave the stove on, that kind of stuff. And I used to beat myself up for this something awful for the longest time. And thank God for good sponsorship and the inventory process. I used to sit there and think I was the biggest scumbag in the world because I loved booze more and drugs more than I loved my own son. And inventory had taught me that that's not true at all. It's not that I love my booze and drugs more than I love my son. It's just that booze and drugs is more powerful. And it took me a long time to really understand that. But boy, when that hit me, man, it was just like all of this stuff washed over me. Oh my God, I'm starting to understand this stuff. I'm starting to get it. And I'm going to these meetings, and I'm trying to hear stuff. And I remember walking into this one meeting this night, and this guy who was my age that got sober the same time that I did had a very different experience in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. He used to hang out, and he was told the most spiritual thing you can hear in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's get in the car. And he was told to get in the car, and these crusty old timers would start reading this book to him and telling him what to do. And he started to have this experience, and he started talking about he's looking around the room, and he happens to lock eyes with me, and he's talking about what alcoholism is. And he said, and he happened to lock eyes with me, and he says, "You have absolutely no idea how sick you are." And there was this pregnant pause, and I'm looking back and forth, and I'm like, me? And he goes on about his talk, but my world stopped. And I remember sitting there in that chair going, that. Whatever he's talking about, I have that. I didn't know what that was, but I wish I could have told you. I went up to this guy after the meeting and said, "Hey, man, could you tell me what you did in order to say what you just said?" And I didn't. I drank vodka with this guy for 6 months. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night going, what did he mean? What was he talking about? Right. And long story short, I'm sitting here behind this church, a pouring down rainstorm, and I'm bawling my eyes out thinking I'm going to drink myself to death, or I'm killing myself. And I said, "God, please let me hear something tonight that's going to change the trajectory of my life." And I meant it with every fiber of my being. And when I went into this meeting, some lady who had no business reading what she was about to read this announcement from something called the Jersey Shore Roundup in Long Branch, New Jersey. Now, I had been going to these meetings, and people keep raising my hand, I'm coming back, and people started giving me prayer cards with the third and seventh step prayer on it, right? And I started reading this stuff, meaning it. You know how in the book it says, "We thought well before," right after you say the prayer. And I didn't care. I just needed something to happen, whatever this power was. And I had a big problem with the God thing, guys. I remember being pushed up the wall by my neck at 8 years old, being told to get in the car and then go to church and glad hand people and basically be like, "Here, take my advice, I'm not using it," kind of stuff. It was a fear and vengeful God that I was exposed to. And I was just like, man, you guys can have that. But I was so desperate that I was willing to at least move in the direction of that was away from where I was. That's how much pain I was in. So I remember, getting a sponsor guy that had like 43 years, and I go home, and I don't know if I could stop drinking. And I remember, I went back out, and I had this really rough night in January, about 90 days before my sobriety date. My son, who's now 18 months, I'm home with him. My wife's back to work, and I'm hung over like I mean, we call alcohol poisoning a hangover. I mean, I go out to smoke a cigarette in the morning and drink some coffee, and my little boy's banging on the glass of the French door. And I turn around to tell him that, hey, Daddy will be right back in because I got to come in and wash all the smoke off me and all that stuff. And I'm just feeling terrible. And I turn around to look at him and say, hey, Dylan, Daddy will be right back in. And I see him, I see the reflection of me in the glass, and a white light hits the window and blinds me for a split second, fills me with mortal fear. And on the spot, I was a 20-year cigarette addiction was just up and pulled up out of me. And I don't know what, I look back on it now, didn't feel like this at the time, but it was the undeniable hand of God just coming through my life. And within the next month, I lose the job I hate at the beginning of what is going to be the season where I make the majority of my money. And I'm sitting there going, oh my God, now I got no job. I'm absolutely out of my mind, full of mortal fear. I can't sleep more than 2 hours a night. It's like there was a match lit to the base of my skull 24/7. Now I'm going to 3 meetings a day. I'm going through acute nicotine withdrawal. I can't form a sentence, read words on a page, anything. So they'd hand me readings in the meetings, and I would just pass it along and grunt. And all of a sudden, over the next 90 days, there's like 2-3 seats open around me. People thought I was psychotic. And I probably was, probably still am to some degree. And the only 2 guys that would talk to me were these 2 old timers that had like 40-something years that remember what it was like to come in that shot out. And they'd hand me a half a cup of coffee. They'd buy me lunch, and they'd just sit with me and just say, hang in there and all that stuff. And so what's weird about this is 90 days later to the day, the same thing happens to me with opiates and alcohol. No detox, nothing. I was surrendered. And I've had educational variety, spiritual awakenings, thing like this. This was a barn burning white light moment. And guys, it was not one of those peppermint. I did not write a book after this that would change the world. I was miserable. This was the worst I had ever felt. And normally when that stuff happens, I curl up in the fetal position and wait for a grown up to come by. And something, when that mortal fear was put into me, I was also given a gift, was the ability to endure it. And this pain lasted for 6 months and 1 day. I do not know what the extra day was about, but I woke up one morning and it was all gone. And I had bought tickets to this Jersey Shore roundup, and one of the old timers had given me like a Bob Darrell CD or something. He happened to be going to this thing. So I was like, all right, I kind of like the way this guy sounds. So I went there, and I took this guy with 40-something years, and I go and I start sitting in this room, 800 people in it. It's one of these big Woodstock style type things where everybody kind of takes a step and they kind of share their experience on it. And it was the first time, guys, I had been in and around the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous now 18 years, and this was the first time I'd ever heard what I actually suffered from. They talked about this phenomenon of craving, that it's the distinguishing characteristic that makes me alcoholic, which means if I don't have it, I'm not an alcoholic. And I was like, that's a pretty big problem. Then I hear this. Yeah, that's not your biggest problem. So you got a mind that gets so restless, irritable, and discontented sober that the same voice that tells you to put the drink back down is the same voice that tells you to pick the drink back up again. And I trigger this phenomenon of craving. And then I drink until I have to stop. And then I stop until I have to drink. And this cycle goes on and on and on and on. And it's fatal. And there's no human power that can relieve me of it. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, oh my God, I'm an alcoholic. And it actually landed on me with what that actually meant, the depth and weight of it. And then I thought, oh my God, I'm excited about testing positive for a terminal illness. And then they hit me with the hope. But they're like, we have a solution. And then they bring up the God guy again. And I'm going, oh no, not this again. I thought I'd postponed or evaded it, right? Like our book says. But I got this 3-headed dragon of step 1 behind me now. And I got this little tightrope off into the darkness that I'm supposed to just walk out into, having no idea what it's going to be like. And at the end of it, I'm going to have this relationship with this power that owes me a beating. right? According to what I knew about God. But did you see the three-headed dragon behind me? So I get to step two with a gun to my head, right? And what step two didn't happen for me in step two, guys. It happened on the process from three to through nine that got me. That's where I had my experience where God revealed himself to me because I was running away from the three-headed dragon, right? My ass was on fire. And I remember going through this stuff and listening to step two, and then this little lady from Austin, Texas gets up there. Katie Parker starts talking about step three. And my God, it was like the room parted and it was like she was talking directly to me. And I'm having this step one experience in front of 800 people. And I'm actually learning that, hey, you know, this whole terminal illness that you got, and we get to step two, and here's your solution. Let me tell you why you can't have one. Excuse me? Selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of my problems. We have to be rid of this selfishness or it kills us. And I'm going, the book is called Alcoholics Anonymous. Are you telling me I suffer from toxic selfishism? Yeah. So much so that we're going to actually tell you that you got to kind of turn your will and life over to this power, right? But you can't do that because you're playing God. You can't have God if you're playing God. So all of a sudden now I got to look at all these manifestations of self because I was like, what the hell does selfishness and self-centeredness have to do with me drinking? Not a whole heck of a lot, but if it blocks you off from the solution, it's pretty darn important. So we got to look at all these different ways that selfishness and self-centeredness blocks me off from God. And I got to kind of make this deal with this power that he's going to be the director. I'm going to be the actor. And I got to stay close to him and perform his work well, and he'll provide what I need. Like, guys, that's the deal. That's the terms of the deal. Stay close to him and perform his work well. He'll provide what I need. But I can't stay close to him unless I get close to him. I can't get close to him if I'm blocked. So I got to start looking at resentments. What does Steve look like when he's in resentment? And basically, I walk around with these scripts in life that I don't know are scripts and I don't know I have. And when you don't follow them, your name goes in column one. And what you did is column two. And column three, Katie had taught me. I met her the next day at the coffee pot because I was shocked at everything that she had just said. And all of a sudden, it's just me and her sitting there. You talk about divine intervention. She basically gives me her number and looks at me. She sees the new guy on. And she's just like, I get talking and she gives me her number and all this other stuff. She's like, well, call me after the conference. I'm sure you got a lot to, I mean, I'm still reeling in the fact that, like, I found out I was actually an alcoholic because I felt like Bruce Willis in The Sixth Sense when he found out he was the dead guy. And I was like, oh my God, I'm an alcoholic. And I remember hearing the rest of the steps and all this other stuff. So I ended up calling Katie, and she takes me formally through step three after her husband, Charlie, took me through kind of one and two. And I remember Charlie going, where are you at with we agnostics? And I was like, well, I kind of grew up Catholic, altar boy. I skipped that. I skipped that chapter. And I just remember hearing him say, with this long pause on the other end of the phone, he goes, maybe we ought to give we agnostics a read. And basically what it was Steve, put the gun down and be willing to take some steps and have a new experience. And your belief in whatever your concept of God will sure to come to you. And that's exactly what happened. And I remember kind of Katie lining me out on inventory, and she had me do something a little bit different with the third column, she didn't just want me checking boxes that it affected self-esteem, pride. She wanted to know how it expected. She would always ask me, who's upset? Mark Houston was a huge influence on her and Charlie's life, and they had me kind of doing this. I had no idea what any of this stuff was at the time, or who Mark Houston was. And she's like, this is where you're going to see the scripts, the old ideas that you've been living your life by. And I didn't know this at the time, but she was tying my inventory to my 10th step, because these are the things later that I'd be watching for on a daily basis. And I start to see the cyclical nature of the steps. And it's not just this linear thing where I check a box and I'm like, good, thanks, high five, sponsor, appreciate it, I'll take it from here. And I remember this stuff, and she took me to the fourth column in a couple of things, and then she wanted me to do it on my own. And I just remember calling they introduced me to my sponsor, Bill Stewart. He's actually in Tennessee. And I met him on the phone sight unseen, and he kind of walked me through the turnarounds into the fourth column. And I just remember the properly done fourth column will turn the first two columns into a lie. And I had to kind of walk the dog backwards to see the decision based on self that placed me in a position to be resentful. And I went through the fear inventory, what Steve shows up when he's afraid, and this, that, the other thing, and shared all this stuff. And one of my favorite things about the inventory process is some of my teachers would say the sponsor brings the flashlight, the sponsee brings the shovel. And they show us how to dig. And when I got through this process and I go home and I did the hour in the fifth step, and I had a lot of meat on the bone now to go into 6 and 7. I saw a lot of resentments that I thought were justified that ended up becoming things to go on my amends list because I found them objectionable. And my favorite thing to say and to hear while doing a fifth step is, oh my God, I didn't think of that for a second, right? And you can watch the mindset, the old idea just explode and change on a dime and set somebody off on a whole nother path, because you can see that I was wrong, right? And then I started making these amends, right? And except for 4, right? All of them except for 4, because I was like, there's no way. I already know how this is going to go, and I'm going to share these 2 with you, and then I'm going to have to kind of jump off of here and head up to work. But I had a big problem with my dad, and he had called me when my son was born to tell him to get baptized or this, that, the other thing, and I lost it on him. And I was like, you have lost the ability to give me any spiritual advice a long time ago. And I hung up on him. I was so pissed off at him. And I didn't talk to him for a year, because you can't talk to me like that, right? And he would come up over the holidays with my mom. At the time, they were living in Florida, and to visit my other brother and 2 sisters. And I didn't go see him, and I sent my wife and my son over, because you can't talk to me like that. I wouldn't take phone calls, emails, nothing. And what I didn't know is a result of that was that year I was punishing him would be the last year that I would know my mother as my mother. She got dementia. And I robbed her the ability to get to know her grandson, and I robbed my son the ability to get to know his grandmother, because you can't talk to me like that. Guys, I did this sober. This isn't a result of my drinking. I did this sober. Right. And I would not let this go. I couldn't get to the other side of it in inventory. Finally, my sponsor sends, he goes, you got to call Katie and read this to her. And I made an appointment, because she sponsors half the world. And I remember reading this one piece of inventory, took 2.5 hours. And she is going through this stuff like, okay, are your parents still together? How many kids? Where are you at in the lineup? What was the money situation like? And she's like painting context, humanizing my father. And she goes, is there anything that he did that he does better than you? And typical new guy response, what do you mean? I needed time to think about it, right? So I could gauge and get a clever answer. And she goes, well, he had 4 kids. You have 1. Was he a better provider? Whoa. She sunk my battle. Yeah, man. Yeah, I guess he was. Well, what are some of the other things? Well, he was always there for my sporting events. It was a big deal in my house. He taught me my profession, golf. And she's humanizing and painting context around him. And I'm just sitting there, and all of a sudden the ice just starts to melt. And then all of a sudden, after a few more series of questions, it's, oh my God. And he happened to be up in the Lehigh Valley. My mom ended up in the hospital with complications due to this dementia. And I drove an hour over to see him. Talk about that little, that divine spark of that God shot, that God moment. When I had that realization, he was an hour away, and I got in my car. And I wasn't going to make this amends to him, because I knew how it was going to go. And I went and I made this amends to him, and I got to watch him heal right in front of me. And I swear to God, if there's anybody here that's new, that's afraid of amends or afraid of inventory, my advice to you is run to inventory and amends. They're still the greatest tool in my toolbox, and it's what puts the rocket fuel in my rocket to get me to that 4th dimension. And especially the ones that I don't want to do, right? And I thought I missed the opportunity to make amends to my mom because she had dementia. And about a year later, I get the phone call. My dad had ended up in acute renal failure. He's the main caretaker of my mother with dementia. And I get the phone call from my sibling, Steve, can you get on a plane tomorrow and go down to Florida and look after mom while dad figures out if he's going to live or not? Do you think I would have got that call had I not made that amends? Right? So I go down there and I'm doing my prayer and meditation in the morning. Every morning I'm taking my mom over to the hospital to see my dad, and he looks like hell. And in my prayer and meditation every morning, I keep getting that still small voice, make the approach, make the approach. And I'm arguing with the still small voice because I think I know how it's going to go, right? And every, mid-afternoon, there's a huge thunderstorm in Central Florida, and I drive my mom over to the hospital, and it looks like death's door outside, and then the heavens just open up, and I just start. And I say, Mom, I got to talk to you. And as soon as, I don't know what the hell came out of my mouth, but I just started up the guilt, shame, remorse, like all of this stuff started flowing out of me. She takes my hand, puts it in her lap, and she looks out the window, and she showed up. She was there for that. She came, I don't know what the hell happened, but she showed up. And every time I tell this story, I kind of lose it a little bit because she's patting my hand. She's looking out the window. She's going, I know, baby. I'm just so proud of you. You just keep doing what you're doing. And she goes, do you still have to go to those classes? And I said, yeah, Mom, I still have to go to those classes. And something came out of the middle of me I hadn't felt in a different way since I had that white light experience on my back porch. This is now years later after the pandemic and all this other stuff. And I would have missed it. I would have missed it all. This is all the result of steps 10 and 11 and sponsoring guys and trying to push the envelope further because, guys, when I relapsed and when the pandemic happened, I relapsed because it pushed me in the direction I was facing, which was out of AA. And when I relapsed, when the pandemic happened, I was actually seeking a deeper relationship with this power because I finally understood what I suffered from. And I understood the secret to survival and recovery is repetition. That's it. Just keep doing this stuff over and over and over again and keep trying to go deeper with it. God will meet you wherever you're at on your journey, whether it's 40 days, whether it's 40 years. This process meets you where you're at if you're staying in this process. I'm still scared to death of that three-headed dragon behind me, guys, because I have current experience in step one. Not that it's been over 10 years since I've had a drink, but the mental obsession, the spiritual malady, guys, thanks, Glenn. I am current with that in my life. I do evening reviews. I do on awakenings. I look at how selfishness and self-centered, that stuff I learned back in that third column, right? And I'm current with the inventory process because I have to write this stuff over and over and over again, not from some place of virtue, guys. I'm that sick. I'm that sick sober. Like I have to constantly have a bunch of guys I'm working with, a meeting service like this, because this does not stop, and it's gotten a lot better, and I've gotten tools to handle it, and I've gotten the ability to have a pause in the emotions and whatever's happening and things like that. And, I thought that once I got sober and I started working the program that I'd be free of problems or pain. And that's not been my experience. What I've had to do is filter my life through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what that's given me, what that's netted out is a life beyond my wildest dreams. And what's crazy is I never dreamed it would be that. I didn't even think to dream this much of what I've done. I would have settled for just not drinking and just being generally miserable at meetings because I thought that's what recovery was. There is so much more available here. I had no idea how big of an illness alcoholism was and is, but I really sold short the solution that Alcoholics Anonymous offers. And wherever you're at with this process, there's always more available. That's the great hope. That's the great uh, promise of what I've experienced in this program. Not that everything's been been roses and all that other stuff, but I've got the ability to not be paralyzed by life and react to it. I've actually been able to call people and say, "Hey, do you have any experience with this?" and walk my way through it with holding on to you guys. That's what I learned here. That's what I was taught here. And yeah, man, I don't want to stop living this way ever. And it's that relapse still drives me. That fear of it, that healthy fear of it, still drives me. So if you're new, hang in there. And if you're not feeling the way you think you should be feeling, maybe there's something more available for you. So I'll offer that for your consideration, guys. Thanks for having me. I'm going to hand it back to Glenn. I'm going to jump on my phone and drive to work, but I will be listening. So God bless you guys. Thanks for having me.